When we look at the degree of comparing mixed economies, what's really interesting when we think about the world in general, we have very few countries that actually are on complete ends of the spectrum. The far right, which is being completely free, and far left. As you can see, we have only a few that really sampled align that way. Most of all the countries in the middle really do are mixed economies. So this is like that spectrum where it can go on in infinite lengths in either direction, and mostly basically depending on how close they align with centrally planned or how close they align with free markets. As we see, the United States is not going to be completely free, as we do have government interventions and restrictions. And even China isn't so far over to the left. Um, if you remember from looking at centrally planned economies and looking at China's evolution from the basically the rise of the People's Republic of China and the implementation of communist China, there's been a more of a move and a shift towards having private property and some private industry in China. So they're not as far left as North Korea. North Korea has been seen as one of the most restrictive economies in the world. And Singapore has been considered one of the least restrictive economies in the world. And the United States is roughly just over in the right area, but not all the way. So in 2020, there was an update by the Heritage Foundation, which is an independent foundation that basically just looks at economic freedoms. There is some bias here, but it was an interesting comparison to at least kind of share some around the world what it looks like. So they have a lot of different kind of categories that they look in, looking all the way from financial freedom and then looking at the government's kind of health and wealth in between. Tax burden is a big one, and of course looking at all of these different things, and then creating an overall score and ranking the countries around the world based on these overall scores. The United States actually ranked 17 in 2020, and we're going to look at their score in just a minute. But as you can see, Singapore over in down here, and you have their green being one of the freest. Hong Kong, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Some of their still free practices and free markets that kind of still leave them least restrictive. And of course, you have quite a few countries within South America, the continent of Africa, and of course, in the Middle East and Russia. You can't not include, it's like a spiral over here, that are grading more and more restrictive, of course, leading with Hong Kong, North Korea as one of the most restrictive nations in the world. In 2020, Singapore actually did rate as the most free market in the world. So looking at specifically the United States, as you can see, government spending, tax burden, which is still not 100% in the green, meaning we still have a high a tax burden on its citizens. But the biggest thing is the government spending. What are they using it on? Fiscal health of the entire nation, government spending. But if you look at everything else, looking at the marketplace, and specifically like the protection of property rights, our overall score has remained high because of those things. The things bringing us down according to, of course, this particular source, to be mindful of that. But they ranked the United States at 17. That can be argued. Some rank it at least very mostly free and still quite free, but definitely a changing perspective depending on what this particular entity, I think, is usually what changes the idea of the United States and its freedom of the marketplace. So North Korea, we always talk about North Korea and China. North Korea is considered more extreme because specifically they are totally dominated by the government. There's very few private property industry, and everything is really owned by the government and monitored by them. Whereas China, we've seen their evolution, having more of an economic transition towards privatization and allowing that transition to occur. So China has been slowly transitioning into a more a freer marketplace, specifically with some of the larger cities. Hong Kong, it's one of the world's freest markets. It has been surpassed by Singapore. Um, as in Singapore, even over Hong Kong, the private sector continues to rule, government protects private property. I think one of the biggest things to recognize is that in the last couple of years, there's been some civil unrest in Hong Kong, specifically with their transition to China, the People's Republic of China, and kind of an end to their complete sovereignty. They've still been able to remain relatively free in regards to their economic freedom and marketplace. There have been some civil kind of freedoms that are more becoming more restrictive, and that's what a lot of the unrest is about. So it'd be in watching Hong Kong, it's important to see how that marketplace survives this transition into the People's Republic of China. In the United States, we know we are a mixed economy. Our foundation is a free market. You can go to the store and basically enjoy the fact that you can buy a variety of brands. There's competition in the marketplace. There's really few restrictions of the competition. Only we have just monopoly laws so that we can continue to have multiple brands competing for your money. And you can go and you can buy it with very little government intervention in regards to that. But we have some things that are regulated by the government. For instance, you can't go to the pharmacist and just ask for some prescription or whatever. There's restraints, there's conditions. It has to be FDA approved. So we have that government agency that has to look at it. Plus, there are some things that producers have to do in the marketplace. So there's some restrictions. But because of this and that freedom to compete, we really are considered more of a free enterprise system with some minimal mixed government intervention. And that's it. Great fun, guys. Great fun.